All right, what's going on, everyone? So a lot to get into today as President Trump just announced that the United States is extending the ceasefire with Iran indefinitely. Not 1 week, not 2 weeks, but until a deal is reached, which could be a while. I mean, this might be the new status quo. Just long-term ceasefire with Iran. We've got a blockade in effect. We're seizing their ships around the world, and we're going to work towards a deal over the coming weeks, months, and years. Now, importantly, this came after Iran announced that they would not be going to Pakistan to meet with Vice President Vance and the U.S. delegation. And just a couple days after, and this one's flying under the radar, I don't know why, but we're going to link all the sources here and we'll run through it. The head of the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency says that Iran has expanded their war aims because they now understand how much influence they have over the Strait of Hormuz. They know the leverage that is there, so no longer are they only concerned with regime survival. They expect concessions from the United States. Again, I feel like that should be getting more attention because all we're seeing in the last few days is the talks are about to happen or they're not. We, for a few days, have heard that Vice President Vance is like in the air or that he's already en route to Pakistan. He's not. He's still here in the United States. And earlier today, Iran said, we're not going because the United States has not moved from their maximalist demands and because the blockade is still in effect. Now, digging into this, President Trump just a few moments ago said, quote, based on the fact that the government of Iran is seriously fractured, not unexpectedly so, and upon the request of Field Marshal Asim Munir and Prime Minister Sharif of Pakistan, we have been asked to hold our attack on the country of Iran until such a time as their leaders and representatives can come up with a unified proposal. I have therefore directed our military to continue the blockade and in all other respects remain steady and able, and will therefore extend the ceasefire until such a time as their proposal is submitted and discussions are concluded one way or another. Now, make no mistake, this is going to be interpreted inside of IRGC circles as the U.S. folding. They're going to present this as President Trump drew a line in the sand. The Iranians would not meet to talk through this, so the United States had to back down. Now, we're kind of having to read between the tea leaves. I will say there's been a lot of hype on the U.S. side in recent days about how a deal is almost done. We're almost there. And then the threats, right? President Trump, within the last 72 hours, Iran better strike a deal by this deadline or else. We're going to go after their energy infrastructure. We're going to go after their bridges. He and Secretary Hegseth have been hammering that home for days. Finally, we come up to the deadline, and instead of strikes, we get a push, an indefinite push of the ceasefire. Now, from the Iranian side, Tasnim News said, quote, despite all of the hype and rumors from the American and from the media and American officials, the Iranian negotiating team has announced to the American side that they will not be present in Pakistan on Wednesday and that there is currently no prospect of participating in the negotiations. This statement was made earlier today. We had all this back and forth, up, down, and sideways for the last 48 hours. It wasn't entirely clear when the ceasefire was going to end. All right, there's like 3 or 4 different times that have been floated out there based off of different announcements that have been made over the course of the last 2 weeks. But everyone generally agreed that today was kind of the final stretch if something was actually going to happen. President Trump earlier this morning said that he was unlikely to extend the ceasefire. So it sounded like, well, we're either going to talk or there's going to be new strikes. But then the talks didn't happen. There had been reports that Vice President Vance was already in the air on the way to Pakistan. That clearly wasn't the case. And then from the Iranian side, just a lot of skepticism. A lot of people saying they're not going. It doesn't look like they're moving. And the reasons they gave were the blockade is still in effect. They view that as a violation of the ceasefire and say we're not going to talk with the United States so long as that blockade is still there. Very similar to what they did with the fighting in Lebanon. They said we're not going to talk until the ceasefire is in effect. So the blockade was one. And the second was they said the Americans have not backed down from their excessive demands. And that's an important one because based off of what the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency said just like 6 days ago, it looks like Iran might be looking for more out of these negotiations now than when the war started in the first place. And something tells me that we probably are not entering these talks with the idea of concessions in mind. Just based off of all the rhetoric, all the ways that this is being presented, you have to assume that we are going into this expecting more than we would have gotten on February 27th. But it's entirely possible the Iranians view this in a very different light. Now, before diving into that, a quick thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Ground News. So while everyone's been focused on the Middle East and Strait of Hormuz, understandably so, something else just happened that barely made a splash. Satellite images show China deploying warships and a floating barrier to block the Scarborough Shoal, a key fishing area within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, stoking tensions that analysts warn could escalate into armed conflict. Now, this story actually came from Ground News, which is sponsoring today's video. It's an app that aggregates thousands of news stories daily, organizing them by topic while showing each story's political bias, reliability, and ownership. Now, this story has been covered by over 35 different outlets, mostly from the right and the center, with a notable share of Asian and non-Western media and about 15% independent sources. And depending on where you look, the perspectives can be pretty different. For example, Time frames Trump's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz as setting a precedent that China could use around Taiwan, while the right-leaning Foundation for Defensive Democracies focuses on China's expanding control in the South China Sea. Same story, completely different framing, which is why I like Ground News. Now, one feature that I've really been enjoying is Blind Spot. It shows you stories covered mostly or entirely by one side of the political spectrum. So no matter where you sit politically, you're getting a filtered version of reality, and Ground News helps you see what you're missing. So go to ground.news/Preston or scan the QR code on the screen for 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage plan, which is the same one that I use. Subscribe to Ground News today at ground.news/Preston. And thank you again to Ground News for sponsoring today's video. All right, so this is one that I don't know why it's flying under the radar. It's very, very important. It's coming from the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Lieutenant General Adams. So these are not, anonymous, unnamed sources that are familiar with the intelligence process or leaks or hit pieces in various media outlets. This is the head of the DIA. So that is the intelligence arm of the Pentagon. All right, so in front of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Intelligence and Special Operations on April 16th, so just a couple days ago, he said, quote, Tehran almost certainly expanded its wartime objectives beyond securing the regime's survival to include deterring strikes on Iran and extracting U.S. concessions, primarily by exploiting its control of the Strait of Hormuz. So essentially, we kind of gave Iran a bit of a present here, where there's always this talk and this speculation of like, what would happen if the strait was closed? What exactly would the response be around the world? And Iran took that step, dangerous step, no doubt, escalatory step in a lot of ways. And they found out that it's actually pretty easy to close it down. It might actually be a pretty significant revenue generator for them, depending on how this shakes out going forward. And it's in a lot of ways their deterrent, right? They'd been looking towards a nuclear weapon was kind of the deterrent of choice. Takes a long time to get there. Take a lot of airstrikes in the process. Shutting down the strait is very easy. And it looks like Iran found out, wait a minute, we can actually ask for more of the United States now than we would have before this war started. General Adams here continued saying, Iran retains thousands of missiles and one-way attack UAVs that can threaten U.S. and partner forces throughout the region, despite degradations to its capabilities from both attrition and expenditure. He added that Iran will likely further asymmetric warfare advancements to augment its conventional capabilities as it remains in conflict with the United States and Israel. The missile launchers and the missiles and the drones, we've heard, again, all sorts of different assessments from unnamed sources. This is coming directly from the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, thousands of missiles and one-way attack drones. So, how many does it take to shut down the Strait of Hormuz? How many does it take to terrorize our Gulf partners? Less than 1,000. Right? So Iran does still, despite the degradation of their military force, does still have significant capabilities. And to that end, the general went on saying that before the 2026 conflict, Iran had attempted to restore its degraded defense and mitigate its military capability shortfalls that were exposed in the 12-day war. He said Iran prepared designated succession plans for military commanders and decentralized command and control, which enabled Tehran to partially mitigate the effectiveness of coalition decapitation strikes. Partially mitigate, right? They took a lot of damage throughout their chain of command. We have a hard time, I think, in this conflict and a lot of conflicts of going in the extremes. Either they have no command and control left at all, or it's entirely intact. What he's getting at is it is probably more intact than we would assume based off of how many have been taken out, because leading up to this conflict, they had put in procedures to make sure that if a commander is taken out, his entire command does not just disintegrate. There's a very clear succession of command down the ranks, or maybe even decentralized, so as those strikes come in, they're still able to carry out operations. He added Iran's former supreme leader maintained his nuclear weapons ban following the 12-day war, despite Iranian officials warning that strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities would cause Tehran to reconsider weaponization. I wanted to include that because I feel like that is contradictory to a lot of the other assessments that we've heard from the White House and the Pentagon during the lead up and the execution of this war. He's saying that Iran was not planning on pursuing a nuclear weapon. Again, this is a public testimony in front of Congress just last week. I don't know why this is not getting more attention than it is. And in terms of the Iranian population standing up, he's kind of saying, it's just not going to be a thing. Iranian authorities almost certainly are keenly aware of widespread discontent among the Iranian populace, judging from the volume of celebrations following the former supreme leader's death, and have instituted drastic measures to thwart any attempt at a popular uprising. So I think there were a lot of folks kind of hoping that would be the case in the immediate aftermath of the opening wave of strikes by the U.S. and Israel. We would see a popular uprising in Iran. It has not materialized yet. There's no indications that it's coming. And the general here saying, look, the Iranian regime has cracked down significantly, even more in the wake of the protests in January and February. Now, if we are entering into this new era of a long-term ceasefire, one of the tactics available to the United States is going to be the seizure of Iranian vessels. And we just had another one. The Pentagon put this clip out just a few hours ago, saying overnight U.S. forces conducted a right of visit, maritime interdiction, and boarding of the stateless sanctioned MP Tiffany without incident in the Indo-PACOM area of responsibility. As we have made clear, we will pursue global maritime enforcement standards to disrupt illicit networks and interdict sanctioned vessels, providing material support to Iran anywhere they operate. International waters are not a refuge for sanctioned vessels. The Department of War will continue to deny illicit actors and their vessels freedom of maneuver in the maritime domain. And this was actually the second seizure of an Iranian ship carried out by the U.S. Navy in the last 48 hours on April 19th. And we now have footage of this as well. The MV Tuska was interdicted trying to move into the Persian Gulf. So this was one where the U.S. Navy for 6 hours was trying to get them to stop and turn around. They didn't. Eventually, the U.S. warned them, get everybody out of the engine room. They fired on the vessel and then boarded it and took it over. So we know that the Tuska was a sanctioned vessel. It looks like it was heading from China to Iran when it was interdicted by the United States. We don't know exactly what was on board. In this one, I've already heard there's been speculation that there was dual-use technology or dual-use items. That's very broad, and dual-use means that it could serve a civilian and a military purpose. So that if it was, all missiles, let's say, or all small arms, that's not dual-use. That is a military shipment moving to Iran. Dual-use could be something like chemicals used in ballistic missile fuel. Right? Or steel, maybe, that could be used for civilian purposes, of course, but also could be used for military purposes. We'll see where that goes. From my understanding, at this point, there has not been a release of the manifest, and the Marines that were on board are still conducting a search. But if this ceasefire stays in place, again, indefinitely, one of the methods that we should expect to see more of here are the seizures of Iranian ships, not just right outside the Strait of Hormuz and off the Iranian coast, but apparently around the world. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.